Hi everyone, thanks for watching or listening. In this episode of the Reach Out series, I'm excited to speak with Jeffrey Hall, a professor of communication studies at the University of Kansas and an internationally recognized expert on friendship, courtship, and mobile and social media. He's spoken to major media outlets, so I'm very lucky to have him here as well. And his book, The Social Biome, is coming out soon. I'm Yochai Alam, founder of Touchbase, which tackles loneliness by nudging and empowering people to reach out to loved ones. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So before I get into the questions, I'd love to hear a bit more about yourself. Could you please introduce yourself and how you became an expert on friendship, loneliness, communications, everything?
Yeah. So one of my very first projects in graduate school, so this was when I was at University of Southern California in Los Angeles, is that I wanted to do a project on the differences between people's expectations about friendship. So the idea is that everybody expects something from their friends, but people vary in what they expect and kind of what kinds of things that they want to get out of their friendships. So that was the very first project. And so I did a set of studies that were around gender differences in friendship, ideal expectations in friendship, our standards of friendship, and kind of how we enact that in our relational maintenance. So those kind of things took a little bit of a backseat for a long time because I studied, as you mentioned, courtship for a while. And I really got into studying social media and mobile media through texting. So that was kind of my first study was on texting. And then I did studies on Facebook and impression management. I did it on Facebook and self-presentation. Then I actually did some of the early studies on what's called social displacement, which is social media taking away to our face-to-face interactions, and also experimentally manipulating social media for well-being. By this point, kind of these two things came together because I had developed kind of a theory and ideas of social interaction, which includes your media use, your social media use, as well, and along with your face-to-face interactions. So the idea was that all of these things kind of came together in the project that I think really gave me a chance to speak to a big audience was the number of hours it takes to make a friend. So that paper ended up, I can't even tell you how often that paper comes up. It gets tweeted, it was on Reddit a couple days ago as a meme. I know that people on TikTok are actually using my study to talk about it. So it's everywhere, which is great for me because I get to continue to talk about friendship, which is something personally really important to me.
I see. Thanks. So maybe you mentioned social media, and this is a hot topic nowadays. Technology and mainly social media are often blamed for various social ills, including loneliness and much worse things. When we're recording it just a few days after the founder of Telegram was detained in France. But technology also makes communications easier, and there are very different types of social media. What kind of usage of social media would you say is nourishing for social connections? Which kind is a bit more harmful?
Yeah. To start with, one of the things we always got to keep in mind is that every major technological revolution in communications has caused social panics that make people uncomfortable. So we know the Telegram, people were concerned about the Telegram because people were getting married through the Telegram, having never met, and be like, oh my God, it's destroying traditional marriage. And we saw this with the radio, and certainly the radio has been used to, promulgate propaganda, to stigmatize groups and to broaden the reach of that message. Television was seen as a major factor in the downfall of all kinds of things, civilization, conversation, and all of these things. So this is not new. This is a conversation that we keep having and we need to have. So I don't mean to say that this is not important. It's an important conversation. It's just that we have to get comfortable with the idea that there's something about new technologies that make us anxious, makes us unclear. How are they going to play a role in our lives? But specific to your question, my research is on texting and friendship really found that overwhelmingly people are using social media in very boring ways. Like, yes, there is hate speech. Absolutely. That's concerning. Yes, there is terrorist acts or, trafficking and child pornography or human trafficking that happens through social and mobile media. It happens. And this is not to say that those things don't occur. However, the vast majority of users do very, very boring things. Very boring things. They text their friends, they text their family, they share family pictures, they catch up on plans, they inform each other about what they're doing that day, they send each other memes and funny images, they share jokes, They laugh. They look at cat pictures or baby pictures. They watch the Olympics. People do all kinds of things with it. And all of those things, which I would call kind of mundane uses of social and mobile media, are largely kind of a net positive. They don't move the needle on your loneliness or your well-being that much, but it's certainly not a negative thing. So I would say that one principle that I kind of generally focus on is, in as much that your social and mobile media is an extension and a complement to your face-to-face interactions, it's nourishing, it's good, and you should keep it up. In as much that your social and mobile media you're using to either cope or to try to make sense of bad circumstances that you're in or deal with personal anxieties or troubles, no form of media is probably going to help. So it's not going to work to watch television, it's not going to work to play video games, and it's not going to work to watch social media. And none of those three primary uses of media time are going to make something that's fundamentally hurting in you better. So when I think of social media, I really think of that as being really on the razor's edge between good and bad, and it slightly moves the needle to good if you focus on the personal. It slightly moves the needle to the bad if you recognize that you're using it to cope with feelings or thoughts or mental challenges that you're struggling with in the absence of face-to-face communication.
I see. Making it an extension of life makes a difference.
Exactly.
I see. And an extension of a significant part of our lives is work, and at work we're efficient. We try. And next question is about, does our culture of being efficient all the time, does it keep us away from nurturing friendships? Even the loneliness epidemic. I mean, my personal experience, I love running. And I run in a group, but I also run on my own. And sometimes starting a run from my doorstep while listening to a podcast is the best usage of time. It's so efficient. And traveling to meet a fellow runner and having a post-run beer is much more social, but it's less efficient. So do you think efficiency has some weight here in loneliness?
Yeah, I think there are two ways to think about this. One is that when we think about what are the reasons that people don't socialize as much as they like, there is a strong negative correlation between the number of hours that you work and the amount of time you spend in face-to-face conversation. And this is something that is held up over 20 years of data from the American Time Use Survey. This exists in surveys from time use throughout the world. People who work constantly or work lots really don't make time for their relationships. And I think that we have to think about this idea that, why do people work as much as they do? Why are we living in cultures that prioritize work over all things? And in some ways, a lot of Americans, especially Americans that tend to be more liberal, look to Europe and we kind of have envy, because Europeans all do things like protect 30 some hours of work, right? Or take longer vacations. I'm often astonished at how many hours that a European will be on vacation. And I think that if we think of efficiency as being kind of almost like the sacrifice of every other personal goal towards the sake of professional and career success, I think that is a very meaningful obstacle to being social. I think this is also important because one of the biggest trends towards change in sociality over the last 50 years in the United States has been more and more women enter the workplace, which means that more and more women are also mimicking that kind of constant efficiency, constant success model that we have in the U.S. And so this is a good thing in the sense that women's, rates of employment are rising, their overall income is rising, their ability to support a family is rising. But it's a bad thing in terms of sociality, because it's taking people away from being able to not work and instead spend time being social. But the other thing that you mentioned, I think, is another way to think about efficiency, which is friendships are not efficient. Spending time hanging out isn't efficient. It is in beautiful senses written about from philosophers in the past to Epicurus, way back into European or Greek philosophy. The idea is friendship is something to be enjoyed for the mere enjoyment of the pleasure of being around other people, to be seen, to be heard, to share experiences, to grow, to change, to challenge your ideas, to converse. And I think what's fascinating is there is a risk that our efficiency attitude is being extended to how we're also trying to optimize our social time. But honestly, if you think about what optimizing social time would look like, it would be like, okay, let's get started right away. Tell me a summary of what's going on. Let's make sure that we get this all across. I want to, get all the highlights of your life. Okay, we got to be done because I got to get on with my life, right? The very nature of efficiency would ruin the beautiful flow that comes from friends joining one each other and laughing and joking and catching up and sharing experiences. The thing is that I think that we have to think about it a little bit differently. Rather than something that we're doing to try to be efficient, we should think of it as something that we are doing because it cultivates, the pursuit of well-being, to thrive, to grow. And when we share ourselves and our relationships and don't treat another person as a means to an end, we benefit both ourselves and the person that we're engaging in conversation with.
So giving to somebody else is giving ourselves.
Absolutely. I think that what's interesting is that like research in communication that focused on affection, focused on the idea, is there a difference between receiving affection or giving affection? And what they found was it's generally a little bit better to give than receive. If you have a compliment or kindness to share, if you have a hug to give someone that you are close enough to hug, if you have affection to give, you benefit more than the person who receives it. But guess what? The person who receives it also benefits. If you're a good listener to another person, that takes a little bit away from you, experiencing another person's emotions, sharing empathically their stress or their frustrations. Those things are costs to you, but are beneficial to the whole kind of system in which that we exist in relationships. So I think, yes, we benefit by giving, but I think it's also an orientation of how do we think about what we're doing when we're being social.
Changing the approach. So this brings me to another question. The point that to me it itches me most about giving and receiving. So I feel so good when I reach out to someone I haven't spoken to in a while. And that person is also thrilled by getting that message, and that makes me even happier. So it's a virtuous cycle of happiness. But I feel I don't do it enough. And speaking with other people, I know they don't do it enough. So I can. What holds us back from reaching out, doing something so good, and
yeah. So there's a new study that was just published in Nature Communications about this topic by a group of researchers. Specifically, Jillian Sandstrom is the second author on this, and she's one of the world leaders in what's called weak tie sociality, meaning communicating with strangers, talking to people that cut your hair or provide coffee, or that's your bus driver. She's the world expert, and she did a study to look at exactly your question: why don't people reach out to their old friends? And a lot of the things that you might guess came up, right? People said, I don't know what to say. It's been so long. I don't know if they've changed, or they won't like me anymore. I don't know if it's welcome. I don't know if they would even want to get a message from me anymore. Also, I think that kind of the summary of a lot of those reasons is it just feels awkward. You're just like, I don't understand why I would do this. What she found, which was interesting, is that she also looked at interventions would work. So once she established that there were things, or more accurately, that the group, because it wasn't just her as an author, but once that they established that people had these reservations, they said, well, what works to change it? And what's interesting is that reporting kind of just like, here are the reasons that you should. It's good for thriving. It's good for growth. Relationships generally enjoy being reconnected, right? Wasn't enough. What seemed to work was actually reminding people that they had reservations to talk to strangers were very similar. But once you kind of change the way that people started thinking about this to say sociality is overwhelmingly more positive after the fact, people think more positive thoughts about an interlocutor, right, a person you're talking to, than they think they will, and they enjoy it, the experience, a lot more than they think they will, works for an old friend. So what that suggests is that people have begun to contextualize old friends in ways that are not dissimilar to strangers, which is a terrible shame, because by my own research, we've already invested in those old relationships, and their ability to be reignited through a friendly text or some sort of positive contribution absolutely is there in a way that perhaps a stranger relationship would be good for the moment, but not necessarily for long-term relationship development. So I would say that, one thing that you can do to think about this is to not only Sandstrom also recommends certain techniques about what to write or how to write, which helps. But really, you have to change your mindset to say, this is an opportunity for you to have all kinds of benefits and very, very little costs.
Yeah, so it's back to thinking about it as something efficient, of doing this, sending the small message to get the thrill back. Yeah. We touched a bit on face-to-face and versus using technology, and I think I read in one of the interviews you participated in was that one of the triggers of loneliness is when people move to a new place. That's my experience as well, and need to start over. So would you recommend, let's say, making a big effort to create new face-to-face interactions, connections, or to prioritize all of those connections we have back home, even if they're more online, connections from previous places? Is there a good balance between the two? Is there some magic formula?
Yeah, there is no magic formula. I wish I could tell you. If I had that magic formula, I'd write a book just on the formula. The reality is that when you move to new places, your routines get disrupted. So the way that, the kind of metaphor that I'd like you to think about is when we talk about the social biome, my co-author Andy Morella and I talk about the ideas a microbiome and a ecology is similar, right? So that could be a gut microbiome. It could be an ecology between plants and trees and some sort of ecosystem. And if we think about the gut microbiome, we know that if people take antibiotics, that they destroy the gut microbiome. It makes people and it has to be restored. So what I like to think about moving is basically taking antibiotics, right? It's like you basically change your entirety of your social routine and social biome in a way which might be great, right? This also happens when people have a child. This also happens when people get married. These are good things. Getting a job, graduating from college, getting a degree, these are good things. But the reality is those good things, just like an antibiotic treatment, can lead to bad things, which is a disruption of your entire social world. So you have to regrow it. How do you regrow it? You ask there's a balance between in-person interactions or new relationships and old ones. The answer, I think, in a lot of ways is to recognize that these are not necessarily mutually in opposition. The truth is that your day-to-day interactions are not going to be meaningfully disrupted by keeping in touch with old friends, right? It's not as if old friends can spend, 18 waking hours with you anymore. It's not the case that they're going to be able to even have time for maybe even a weekly phone call or a video chat or whatever's comfortable with you. But establishing those routines of keeping in touch, so you have a reason to keep calling, a reason to keep texting, say, I'm going to come back and visit you soon. I'm looking forward to being back for the holidays to see you again. Those sorts of moments and touchstones to say we're keeping this nourished, knowing that it's at risk, is really important. But on the other side, which is new relationship development, a paper that I did on the number of hours to make a friend suggests that this happens relatively quick. You have a lot of people in a new environment that you're meeting, getting to know. You have an opportunity to get to know them in a way that there's a certain openness that comes along with that, because a lot of time a new employee or a new person in the neighborhood is like, oh, I might give this person a try. There's a psychological openness that comes with a recognition that someone is new to a system. And by taking advantage of that, you basically say yes to the invitations. If people invite you to do things, say yes. If someone says we should have coffee together so I can show you the ropes of this job that we're working at, say yes. Take advantage of every social opportunity, and because you never know which one is going to turn out to be the possibility of a friendship. But if you don't do that, research generally suggests is by about 4 to 6 months, a lot of those kind of routines and opportunities to develop are already kind of past. You've already missed the window. You've got to do it quick, and you've got to do it early, because once that kind of door closes, people go, well, I guess if they didn't accept my invitation in the months 1 and 2, they're not interested. So our whole concept of that openness is a very quickly shutting door. And I would encourage people, if they encounter those kind of things, is to try to do both. And I know that seems onerous and difficult, but I would say that establishing routines and rebuilding that microbiome health or the social biome health is absolutely necessary.
I see. Very interesting. Yeah, you've mentioned time frames, and your research that is highly quoted shows that it takes at least 200 hours to create intimate relationships. I feel that with my high school friends, especially, where we had very strong bonding in early years, our relationship is deep. Even if we don't speak for a year, even 2 years, we can always pick it up. We can always talk about very intimate, personal things in our lives. And with other relationships, without nourishment, they fade. They go back from the 300 hour. They go back to being the same as they were, and when we only knew each other, spent only 10 hours together, maybe. Is there some kind of way to know when a relationship needs a fresh injection of nourishment, of putting new energy there?
Yeah, Elizabeth Dunn, who's another researcher of these things, has this wonderful analogy. And it says, imagine you are a hungry person and you've come to this island. And in this island, there's this beautiful fruit that's growing everywhere. And you could just pick it right there and then eat it, and it would be nourishing, it would be wonderful. But for some reason, despite how hungry you are, you just look around and be like, meh, I don't have time for that. I'm not really interested in that. And she uses this analogy to say what's strange is about social interactions is we have opportunities to socialize with people all the time. As you mentioned earlier, mobile and social media have created boundless time, geographically spanning, time-spanning opportunities to keep in touch, and we don't use them. And Dunn says, well, why is it the case that we are not really meaningfully, eating that delicious fruit that's around us? And I think that when we think about this kind of analogy, what we have to remind ourselves is that the barriers that come with a new job and new responsibilities, new relationships often take away from our desire and need and want to even try to eat or to try, in this case, to socialize. But I think if we take it one step further and say, if I know these relationships are ones that I want to preserve, what are the things that I can do to make sure that it doesn't plummet from that close relationship level to a lower level? Part of it is that you acknowledge the idea that you've made a priority in your life to keep in touch. That can take a lot of forms. I have a close friend in Los Angeles where I lived for 10 years who I, for years emailed. And then when I would go to Los Angeles, I'd visit them. I have a friend also from my undergraduate education, which was also in Los Angeles, who, he was the best man at my wedding, and we have a monthly phone call. And we always make it before we get off the phone call and we talk again. I have friends that I only talk to like once a year or twice a year, and sometimes around their birthday or something reminds me of them, and I text them, and then we say, hey, let's get together to talk. We talk once, and then we don't talk again. These things, these small acts, these small bits of time in our lives are massively valuable at keeping a strong, deep relationship in a healthy place. But people don't do them because the routines are hard. It's difficult to commit other people to talking to us. It's as if we're saying, I don't want to make other people have to talk to me, which, again, you have to change your orientation about what you're giving to another person by putting the effort into it. And I think the last piece about it is that you also have to acknowledge that some loss is likely. Some loss is inevitable. I have close friends from both graduate school and college that just didn't keep in touch. I tried, or they tried, the timing was wrong, just didn't work out. I have friends that I actually laid dormant for years, that we were very, very close, and then we didn't talk for like 6 or 7 years, but then for some reason they moved closer to me, or something came up in our lives, we all of a sudden got reconnected, and they were allowed to flourish. So one thing to think about when we think about friendship is it's not necessarily the case that your close friends will become like old friends that are like strangers to you, right? Instead, you can kind of think of a friend as more like a dormant friendship. There's a beautiful flower that's actually called the resurrection flower, and when you put it back in water, it opens back up, and it totally unfolds its glory. But when it's left to shrivel, it turns back into something that looks like a pine cone. And I think what we have to think about is the idea is those old relationships may simply be in a dormant state. And if you look at them, they go, oh, they're dead. But if you give them a chance to be renourished, they open back up.
I see. Okay, that's very encouraging. And hopefully also touch base can help with that. So I have one more question. Yeah, we're drawing close to the end, and hopefully we can end on a positive note. One of the reasons we're talking is that there's much more awareness about loneliness, about staying in touch. That's also due to the pandemic, and also the U.S. Surgeon General talked about the loneliness pandemic. Do you think all this awareness will lead to a reduction in loneliness, in better friendship, in more reaching out?
Man, I hope so. I mean, I deeply hope so. The number of different groups in the United States and internationally that are focused on thinking about this is extraordinary. Nothing like this existed when I was in graduate school. Nothing. And there's been a sea change about government interest in studying the problem, understanding the problem, making recommendations around that. You know, I'm working with a working group from Canada that's looking for specific recommendations that people can do, communities can do, corporations can do, governments can do, like the whole span of things that the Surgeon General's report brought attention to. I think there's a hunger for it. I have plenty of good data that suggests that people are longing for closeness. They're longing for wanting to be near their friends and spend more time with their friends. They're just finding it difficult to do that. I hope, you know, and in many ways, hope. I'm reminded by the punk singer Nick Cave. And Nick Cave went through a personal tragedy, and he lost his son in a very tragic thing. And he's written these amazing, beautiful albums about loss and loneliness. And he says that hope is an active stance. It means you have to commit yourself to an ideal that you know is hard and may never come to pass. But you take that active stance because you believe in it. So I hope that lots and lots of people out there, when they hear these messages and learn about them, basically adopt an active stance of choosing to be obligated to one another and to care for one another. And that's where my hopes lie.
I see. Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I'm also a Nick Cave fan. I'll see him in concert in Barcelona.
Woohoo!
Yeah, and yeah, he keeps going. Yeah. Okay.
A lesser person would have been defeated by the things that he encountered. So, yes, he keeps going.
Yeah. There's an excellent documentary, I think he produced as well, 20,000 Days on Earth, worth watching. He's a very intelligent person. Okay, so thanks, Professor Jeffrey Hall, for joining today. That was fascinating. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else also did. Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up? Perhaps tell us about your upcoming book, which we've mentioned.
I would love to. So The Social Biome with Andy Morella is going to be available at the end of January, beginning of February of next year. It already is on Amazon. If you use Amazon, it has a webpage that reserves the book. You can pre-order it. It describes all the things that we're talking about now. It's an articulation of years of research and work about thinking about patterns and systems and how we go about confronting the obstacles to being social. I hope that it will be a book that you really find valuable. And we actually end in a chapter on hope. So check it out, The Social Biome, out in about 4 months.
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll share the link here as well. So thanks again, Jeffrey. Thank everybody for watching. As mentioned, The Social Biome is coming out and you can pre-order it. And you can follow Touchbase on social media and visit gettouchbase.com to see what we're doing here. So that's it. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.